You know that story about how NASA spent $1 million designing a pen that could write in space, and the Russians brought a pencil? That just happened again. So it's a huge deal.
And it as ex-founders, how many times do we see a great business, but we just can't invest, and it's a little disheartening, this game. But as well as being a lesson for founders, this is a lesson for LPs and investors when choosing funds to invest in.
Those who do not pass this keeper test, i.e. their manager would not fight for them, are promptly and respectfully given a generous severance package so they can find someone for that position that makes an even better dream team.
We sit down with a bottle of wine and peace board and have a list of questions that we go through. Like, for instance, there's one that says, is there anything you'd like me to apologize for?
Like, how long do these sessions go for?
Like an hour. But like, because you're opening it up like from a broad perspective and you go in with a rational brain, not an emotional brain, it's actually like quite diffusing the way that the questions are phrased.
Hey.
Morning, how are we?
Yeah, good.
School drop-offs are all going good?
Yeah. All right, the kids are in a bloody good place right now. Yeah, just real sense of gratitude. Life is good.
It'd be nice just to hit pause.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Not between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in my house. Jack's yelling up, screaming, and then Matilda last night coming in, I'm scared. And so Libby lets her into the bed. I'm like, nah. Slippery slope. So I pick her up, take her in. I want you to lie with me. All right. Lie with her, then leave. She don't leave. I was like, what are you scared of? She said, the shadow. Okay, so I turned off all the lights. And then she came back in again. I was like, no, off we go. And then this morning, I find her asleep on the kitchen floor.
Oh, jeez.
So anyway, it's always hard to know the line between effective parenting and neglect.
It is tough, those types of decisions. Like, you want to nurture and all those things, but you got to cut the cord, and it's tough.
A balance. How are you, Ash?
Better than you guys, it's finished.
Yeah. We're just having a bitch and a moan.
Nah, life is good.
Well, my flight back from Melbourne got delayed on Monday night. So we didn't walk in the door until like 11:45. And I was like, no.
Oh, that hurts.
That sucks.
Those nights.
And we'd already been at that airport for like 4 hours. So I think
wow.
It was,
That hurts.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in. I think last week's episode was my favourite.
We received really good comments about last week's.
No. No. So the last week's one that was put up, yes, got a lot of...
The last one that was published.
Very good comments. The last one that was recorded...
I see where you're going.
Never sees the light of day due to a slight technical issue. Now, because we're a mature team, and given how much I've stuffed up in the past, I would no way dine out on this issue. But yeah, Aaron.
I'm sorry, team. I'm sorry. I have disconnected my speakers this week, so there should be no echo, no feedback.
The good news is we're a forgiving bunch. But what's interesting, so I went back for this week's episode to make the show notes, and I thought, we'll copy a whole lot of stuff. And the news ages so quickly, it's like, no, we can't talk about pretty well any of that because that's old and boring.
Yep.
Yeah.
But one thing that I am going to copy across, because again this week in portfolio support conversations, it was a fairly big deal. What we discussed last week was Netflix use of what they call the keeper test. Now, why this had come to the surface was there's a phase in all early stage businesses where the business starts to grow faster than the people. And it would be nice to be able to keep everyone around you, but what tends to happen is that can't happen. And what we find is that companies that are able to really put high performance at the top of the list and have frameworks to fairly measure and drive high performance are the ones that win. Like, so often we look at companies that have failed essentially. Good product, good market, good founder energy, everything there, but they weren't able to attract the best people, they weren't able to retain the best people, and they weren't able to weed out people that just weren't suited to the culture. And there's a maturity, I think, that needs to occur. There's a maturity, I think, that needs to be understood, that it's just not possible for everyone to suit every company. Like, that's just not the way the world works. And the earlier that you can weed that out. Now, a lot of founders Like the majority of founders are also good humans. It's not a natural thing to say, I'm sorry, you're not working out. I'm going to release you to industry and move you on. So we actually need some guardrails. We need some scaffolding. We need some things to help with. And in one of our portfolio companies, it had been a themes in some of the sessions I'd been facilitating where there was just a couple of underperformers that were just going to cause significant concern to the company. Now, why do founders, putting aside the personal aspect of it's uncomfortable and difficult to have hard conversations sometimes and move people on, especially when often you see they're trying, like often people are not sitting there doing nothing. But months go by and the same conversations are happening, results aren't occurring. And what are the normal excuses? It's like, well, we just need to give them a bit more time, or what will my shareholders think? Or I don't want to create instability around the rest of the team. And for me, it's actually a warning sign that if you have any of those issues in your mind, you've got a structural problem that you are weak in. You haven't set expectations internally. You haven't set expectations with shareholders. And so I'll intro this keeper test from Netflix with that context. And I'll just read parts of an email that I sent to the team. I just had an idea I thought I would share following yesterday's discussion. The most successful companies have a culture that weeds out non-performers early. There is a culture willing to make the hard and fast decisions. There's no second guessing or trying to make fish climb trees. Once you realize they're a fish, you need someone to climb a tree, you help them go and find a fishbowl quickly. Now, here's one way to create that culture called the keeper test. And there's 3 bits of content that we're going to go through. What it is, well, a keeper test is really just an open and honest culture that there is a keeper test, and that if you fall out of being a keeper, you're going to be helped to find something outside of the company. Now, to make this process easier, there's what Netflix considers to be a generous severance payment. And look, when we listen to the video from Reid Hoffman, I'm not saying you have the ability to follow this, but what Reid is pointing out is that it's if you make the decision immediately to move someone on and you pay them 2, 3, 4 months there and then, it generally works out a lot cheaper than the 6 to 9 to 12 months I see people put up with non-performers. And then we're going to play a video of what the staff say about it. So straight from the Netflix's website, and I'll put this link up, it says, we focus on managers' judgments through the keeper test for each of their people. If one of the members on their team was thinking of leaving for another firm, would the manager try hard to keep them from leaving? Those who do not pass this keeper test, i.e. their manager would not fight for them, are promptly and respectfully given a generous severance package so they can find someone for that position that makes an even better dream team. Now, another one of the Netflix co-founders, Mark Randolph, explains that at Netflix, we've never thought of ourselves as a family. We consider ourselves a sports team and not a little league team where everyone plays and gets a trophy. No, we're a professional team playing at the highest levels. And my responsibility when I was a manager was not to make sure that everyone got playing time. It was to make sure I put the best possible team on the field every game. I did that because I owed it to the team's owners, I owed it to the fans, and most importantly, I owed it to the other players. So let's just pause there and have a bit of a discussion of our high-level thoughts of this.
Yeah, I love this. And Ash, I know from our convo last week around this, you've got a lot to add around sporting team analogies in this context. But I think the point you made there, Don, around not everyone is a fit for every company, and each company has its own culture. And there will absolutely be some people for who this invokes a trigger type response, or it's just not for them, and that's perfectly okay. I think it is important that we recognize that different companies have different cultures, and it's a shame we did lose last week's episode, but I look at even things like I wonder what
the keeper test says about people destroying. Sorry, my bad. I'll go back on mute.
But will you keep me? But I love this because it promotes open, transparent conversations. And one of the things that we'll pick up when you play the videos in a moment is the fact that employees can separate, is my job safe, from having open, transparent, rigorous debate and discussion. And if I look at some company cultures, they get stuck in a place where people don't feel safe to actually raise things. And I think this creates a healthy environment where people can have those open conversations. And the other thing is, for me, this creates, like the cost of inaction is something founders often forget. And not firing an underperforming employee sets a standard by which others then operate. And what the founder tolerates in the organization, the impacts culture. And the other high performers want to be surrounded by high performers. And so if you're justifying keeping someone, whether it's for inappropriate behavior, toxic workplace relationships, or if it is just that they are not performing despite being a great person, that actually does have a damaging effect that you may not actually be measuring and realizing. So I like tools like this because it actually creates a structured approach to dealing with underperformance.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing that this really made apparent in my mind was actually reducing the stress off the manager. And I think that's also something that company culture can be a real detriment for. Like, you've hired someone, you've gone out, you've interviewed, but then if they're not showing up the way they interviewed as the manager, something like this enables you to disassociate the reflection of that person, you hiring them, on you as someone in the company. There's always going to be more than one person hiring them. And I think by having a structure where you feel like you have the ability to just make a call and say, look, this person's not working out. I think we need to move them on. Here's the reasons why. I've had a discussion with them. This is where we've landed. I think that also reduces a lot of stress on the manager. I've seen multiple people go through performance reviews at JP Morgan, both from, I've seen MDs having to performance review people at my kind of level. And then I've also had friends go through performance reviews, and it is stressful for both sides. So I think something like this, having that within the company culture, reduces a level of stress for everyone, and also just has more transparent and open conversations that I think is really healthy. I love the sport analogy. I really do. It's something that I know Jack and I have chatted a lot about when we're looking at our portfolio companies, and also when we're going through pitch decks and talking with founders. There are key traits in elite athletes who have played team sports that you really want to look for. It's who can be a captain, who can be your number 6 coming off the bench, from a basketball analogy. One of the key things I love about the sport analogy is the idea of a relay team where every person plays a very key part, whether it's 4x100, whether it's someone who is the best in the world at breaststroke, then to freestyle, whatever it may be. But one of the key things I always keep in my mind is that the Australian 4x100 relay team in the women's, if you look at their individual times, they are not the fastest team in the world, but they consistently win gold because they have worked extremely hard as a team to nail their changeover. And that is what makes them the best team in the world. And I think it's the ability to understand each other at that degree of precision, and to practice and to understand the fine tuning and dynamics of a team that have to work like that to win a gold. And for me, that's very similar to a startup business. You need each piece of the pie, each cog working together on the same direction. And this is a great way of, if a cog's not working, then let's be honest, let's have a transparent conversation. Let's not take it personally, and let's do the right thing for the business.
Yeah, and this is on their website. So anybody coming into the company knows that this exists. I like that level of transparency. The shareholders know that it exists. And we're very interested in these kinds of frameworks, because you find me a company that has been really successful, i.e. able to get a venture return. And this is part of the challenge that we have as being an investor, is that you can still have a great business, but it not generate a venture return. Like, our problem is we not only need great businesses, we need a whole range of things that can deliver a venture return. And the pattern regularly is that high-performing cultures driven by high-performing founders that find a way to create this culture are the ones that win. Now, this is just one option. As I say in the email out to the portfolio, this is just one option. Find what works for you. But let's just play what Reed Hastings says about the severance component.
And it's a week or two of pay. It really can be difficult for them. But our minimum is 4 months and goes up from there. So even if like 2 weeks in, we realize there's a mistake, as long as the person hasn't lied to us or something, but we've made a mistake, they get a 4-month severance package. And that does a couple things. One is it makes the person feel better about it because they know that's a material amount of money. And again, 4 months is the minimum. And 2, we get a legal release in exchange for that. And so despite the fact that we've separated from 1,000 people, maybe, we've never had an employee lawsuit. And then third, and most subtly, managers are really nice people. They're human beings and they're good with people, so they don't like doing mean things. And so you can think of the severance payment as like a bribe to the manager to do the right thing because it makes it easier.
Yep.
And without that, what they do is they put an employee on a performance improvement plan, and then the two of them go through this excruciating dance that takes 2 or 3 or 4 months, and then they break up, but it's clearly documented. And that's just a lot worse.
When did you start with the 4-month severance package?
It was 3 months from the very beginning.
That's unusual for a startup.
Yes, it's real money,
yes,
but it's worth it. It doesn't really cost you any more.
Yes.
Okay, because you're going to spend the 3 months managing the person out.
Yes.
And so you're going to end up with that hit. When you cut someone loose.
I think that's one of the key points is it doesn't really cost you anymore. Like in my personal experience, when I succumbed to this issue, it was months and months of hitting your head against the wall. So I like that. I like that component.
Yeah, totally agree. And it is hard though, like thinking for an early stage founder, thinking of having that quantum of cash, but yeah, measuring the true cost of an underperforming employee that you're trying to performance manage out or mentor into higher performance. If you measure the true cost of that, you're actually paying more.
Yeah, and normally in those situations, I've been able to find ways to deal with the cash flow component of it and stagger payments and those kinds of things. Now, for some people listening, this will sound harsh and a bit aggressive. So let's have a listen to what the employees of Netflix have to say about it.
It's literally, I feel like it's a conversation that you have with your manager, and it's completely based on feedback, and then you either apply that feedback or you don't.
One, I have experienced it to be a very positive, being encouraged to actually go up to my manager and be like, where do I stand? If I was to leave tomorrow, would you fight for me?
Yeah, and I don't think the keeper test should be a yes, no. I think the way you describe it is pretty accurate. It's like, where do I stand? Would you fight for me? Like, what do you see in me? Where do I need to step up?
So I did ask one day, is my job at risk? Because I think it goes so quickly, and we were having like different opinions about topic, and I was like, is my job at risk? Like, no. It's just like we're having a conversation, and it's just always just asking like where you're standing and where you need to improve.
And I think it also links into the ongoing feedback. Like if there is something that isn't working, I truly believe that will have been brought up through feedback.
I think if you are giving constant feedback and are open about what's going well, what's not going well, I don't think the keeper test is scary at all. There's no surprises there. I think for a company, it's very healthy to have something like the keeper test because it makes sure that you have only stunning colleagues, right? Or that you have a lot of stunning colleagues.
Well, starting to speak to people and also realizing in my own role, everyone has worked with someone who is just there because that's where they've worked for a number of years, and no one's really given that kind of thought about if this is right for them. So it's a really active thing, and it's really also a positive thing to know that someone has chosen to keep you.
Sometimes I think we've talked about the sports team, or sometimes we talked about a jazz band where we all need to be aligned and synchronized. In those kind of environments, it's something that you don't question. So like when you're trying to get to do something or get to a place from a business point, I think I really see it as a common sense or something that you need to have.
Such a good clip.
Yeah, to me, it's facilitating this ongoing culture and climate where there's no surprises. That's the key word for me, no surprises, because often this happens. And with a lot of founders going, oh, I don't want to scare the staff, or what will my shareholders think, or whatever else. It's like, well, you aren't creating a culture where you have that open and transparent dialogue.
On the performance review side as well, it's that building on that feedback piece, having spent the first half of my career in a big organization with structured feedback loops, with here's your 6-month review, your annual review, where that was innate in culture, and there's platforms and tools to get 360 reviews and all of that stuff, to then going and working in the startup ecosystem, where sometimes you just forget to ask for feedback, or because you're all moving so fast, because you're trying to keep up, you're pivoting, all of those things, feedback gets forgotten. And I think this culture really helps with that continuous pulsing of feedback. And I think that's something, particularly in this startup world, I think gets lost. And the more feedback you can get, the more articulate your team will be, the more in tune with each other and their strengths and weaknesses. So I think this is very powerful from a performance side as well.
100%. And recognizing that roles change and people, as the organization grows, the individual who may have been incredibly well suited at the start of that journey and added a ton of value to the organization, over time, they may not have that same value add or fit exactly what the company needs.
Well, the big issue there is that everyone that starts in a really early stage business are generalists.
Yeah.
It's just go do what needs to be done. And you find all of these energetic people that love the mission, love the founder. But there's this transition point where most of our portfolio's at, where you need specialists. And suddenly, if a generalist can't become a specialist and get the systems and processes and controls, then they're no longer suited to what the company needs to achieve the vision and mission. And then you start to get a problem. And that's always one of the big transitionary issues.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love this framework. I can see how there'll be people who really dislike it or the idea of it is not appealing, and that's okay. Like, the thing is that founders need to define the culture of their organization. Models like this can be learnt from in terms of building high-performing teams.
And we had a slight diversion last week that I've just remembered that there's these common patterns in life. And what we're talking about is a culture within your business relationships of regular and early feedback before they become a big issue. And last week we discussed a common pattern we use in our personal relationships. Because when you track, like, why does intimacy sometimes in some relationships wane over time? Well, if you're annoyed and pissed off by the other person, it's hard to want that close connection. And so what you actually find is that if you're having difficulty there, you're missing some rails to run on to regularly raise and process stuff that often is left to build up until it becomes a killer. And I think it's the same pattern in companies, that if you don't have the culture, like if you're only doing a performance review every 6 months and then you get together and you're all frustrated and you go, I remember like 4 months ago, you didn't do this thing. It's just descends into madness.
I'd forgotten that part of our conversation last week. But yeah, Maren and I have reinstigated the State of the Union weekly catch-up. It's not quite Festivus and the airing of grievances, but pretty close to it.
I have to do it daily.
We do monthly.
Monthly, there you go.
Monthly.
So you're high performing, and
we sit down with a bottle of wine and team sport and have a list of questions that we go through.
Questions.
Nice.
That is exactly the right thing. Never do statements either. Always questions. So instead of you're an idiot, it's could you help me understand what you were thinking?
We're actually even more broad than that. We go like a layer above, where, like, for instance, there's one that says, is there anything you'd like me to apologize for? Or there is, when was the last time you needed me but I wasn't there?
Fuck, how long do these sessions go for?
Like an hour. Yeah. But because you're opening it up from a broad perspective and you go in with a rational brain, not an emotional brain, it's actually quite diffusing the way that the questions are phrased.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah.
Humans left to their own devices without scaffolding and systems and rails to run on, it just descends into madness. And life is about so many different patterns across different phases of life. And I think you got to find what works for you and find these rails to run on.
That's what I love, Don. You taught me about the DZ's frameworks, but they equally apply to relationships. And it's so true. A lot of these models and frameworks you can apply to everyday life with your partner and also with kids.
Well, I'll just finish off with the last bit of this email, because for some, it's not black and white, just go and implement the keeper test. Because in my experience, 9 times out of 10, at this phase of the life cycle that a lot of the listeners will be in and where our portfolio's at, the reason they're not a keeper is not actually them, it's you. You're the problem. And why is that? So I put in this email a warning. Now, we need to be very careful here. Not only do we need a competent and culturally aligned individual, they need to have the structural ingredients in place to support them. Number one, they have a very clear role and responsibility. They know what they need to do to achieve the vision and mission that they clearly understand. Now, that's often one of the biggest issues, is role and responsibility is often very unclear, and the amount of training time is poor. When I was a burger engineer at McDonald's, I think the on-ramp training was 4 weeks before you go and flip a burger or run the front counter. Yet the majority of our portfolio, or early stage people, will hire senior roles, give them a computer, sit down with them for 90 minutes, and bang, you're trained. Come on. because the companies are running at such a pace. And so often the work we're doing is saying, hang on a minute, let's get role and responsibility really clear. Now, another problem at early stage is that you give someone a role and responsibility, even if it's clear, but if they have multiple roles and responsibilities that are conflicting in their time, that's going to create a problem, because short term always conflicts with long term. And like in one instance, a sales consultant to help them build a structure was like, the people in the field have the relationship with the customers. They would be the best salespeople. I can get behind that. But the people in the field in an early stage business are also dealing with all the screw ups and the quality problems and all the different things. And when you've got an existing customer yelling down the phone at you, that's where your energy goes. And structurally, they're then not getting to the sales. And so we have a structural problem there. Now, let's say that you have no structural problems, role and responsibility is clear, but you don't give them the authority to make decisions in their job, you're going to have problems. And that's a big issue, because in early stage, the authority tends to live with the founders or maybe like the really close confidants around. And we hire people rapidly, but I almost never see a job description that also has a table of their authority matrix. Like that just doesn't exist. So we hire these people, but we don't let them make decisions. They've got to keep coming back to other people. Authority is unclear. But then we don't have the systems in place for goals and KPIs, and how do they know they're doing a good job? How do they know their peers are doing a good job? And then we don't have the remuneration systems to actually drive the right behaviors towards the role and responsibility to achieve the vision and mission. So I just lay out those 5 things that's the work that Tribe effectively does with its companies, because when you're making that transition, right, you're going from founders in the center controlling everything to now you've got to have a top-down, bottom-up integrated system where you've got role and responsibility, no conflicts, authority, goals and KPIs, and remuneration systems that drive the right behavior. And so what we tend to find is a lot of the non-performers have occurred because of the lack of these ingredients. So what that means is this constant transitionary period where we've got to find the right people that can work without those ingredients, but still deliver results, whilst in parallel, we build out those ingredients. We've got to fly the plane and build it at the same time. We've got to cross the street and chew gum, all of those things. And so we've just got to accept that sometimes, which is why what a big failure often is when people hire people from big companies, but those people don't realize the structures that they had behind them. So they come into this early stage where they actually don't have the authority. They don't have the systems and goals and KPIs to measure whether they're doing well. The remuneration system is difficult because we don't have those underlying things, and we wonder why we get failure.
Yeah, just reflecting on as you were talking then, Don, the 3 of you being Aaron, Don, and Jack actually asked me these 5 questions, not in this direct form, but when you were interviewing me, having come from a gigantic corporate, it was clear that some of these points were actually concerns of if I could handle not having the systems, not having the tools, not having the structured KPIs. And so I think that's something we should really push founders to do as well, where you should be very transparent with the people that you're hiring at certain points in the business evolution. Like, I wanted to dive into that because I actually like helping to build these systems and tools. Like, that's something that I actually find fun and creative, and want to have the ability to help build the strategy on, okay, well, here's how we can build roles. Here's how we can actually think about structural alignment. And I actually find that fun and actually quite empowering. And so I think that's something we need to make sure that founders, but managers are actually being really transparent in that hiring process of not trying to fake the systems and tools, and just be open and honest with people, because some people, well, hopefully most people know whether they like that or not in themselves. And I think that should also help.
Now, Australia's IR laws then need to be overlaid onto this, obviously. This is in America. So really we're talking about the first 6 months in your probationary period. And what that means is you're going to have some really good systems in place to know that they are a keeper. In my experience, if your probation period is 3 months, you work out if they're a keeper on 3 months and 1 day. Or if it's 6 months, it's 6 months and 1 day.
We talked about this on other podcasts, but life cycle stage appropriate hires, like when someone is coming from a not necessarily larger, but later stage organization in terms of the life cycle stage of systems and processes into an early stage. And Yeah, absolutely. Founders need to be really transparent with where they're at in terms of their, what we describe as the big A capability. And in our case, that's reasonably low, but making sure that someone's natural style is a fit for the gap in the organization and for the role. And it's something often forgotten. Lots of founders will hire purely on experience, some on qualifications, but actually looking at the behavioral profile and style of that individual. Will that fit both the organization culture, but also the need of the role and the need of your point in the life cycle is such a critical aspect. And we've lost Don.
Yep. He's gone. Clearly, I don't like systems and tools. I've pulled CRM. The Australian IR laws are just so different.
It was so funny when we were in the US and we had the legal session and they were going through the employment laws piece about US employment laws. And the founders are all like, oh, but yeah, what about this? And what about this? And they're like, no, we don't do that. And on the Aussie founder panel sessions, some of the Aussies were saying, oh, I came into the US market and wanted to have very generous employment terms similar to Australia and XYZ and put all these in the contracts. And it actually turns out most of the locals actually don't care about that stuff and it just confuses them. And it's really expensive to actually put in place and you end up creating more complications. So like just go with the local system. Don't fight it.
Yeah, I never even contemplated it. It was just, yeah, I'm an at-will employee. Perform or be cut. And like, again, athlete mentality of show up, perform, you make the squad. Every day you're fighting to make the squad. You're fighting to get court time. It's that for me, it's always been that same mentality. So I was never nervous about, I could walk in and be fired tomorrow. I'm like, no, I'm going to continue to show my value each day. And if that happens, I'm going to back myself to go find another job. And so I think like it also depends on the headset of the person. And because I started my career there, I'm like, yeah, well, that's how it is. And I came back here and I was like, oh, right. Reading an Australian contract for the first time, I was like, had to like give it to Dad. I'm like, is this normal? I'm confused.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to. You had such a good thought going there, Ash. I didn't want to interrupt it, but has never called me 3 times in a row in his entire life.
Is he alive?
He's alive. So where did you land?
We ended up talking about US and Australian employment law comparisons. Yeah, I think just going straight into like the big news of this week.
Yeah, okay,
we can't avoid talking about it.
This week has been big with DeepSeek causing, what was it, about $1 trillion wiped out of the NASDAQ, 500 billion alone out of NVIDIA. What's interesting though is before getting to, is this a structural thing? I always look at like the VIX and the VXX. So when you look at the little spike on the VIX just on the right-hand side there, it didn't really signal a broad, huge return to volatility. But if you have a look at NVIDIA though, technical analysis is not the be all and end all, but when things start to make lower highs and lower lows, that can tend to be something structurally is changing in the price action. But I saw somebody post, if you have a look at the volume, so the volume yesterday was 108 million shares, the biggest volume since April 2024. So for a start, NVIDIA is a high volatility stock that trades a lot of volume. So let's not forget that. Now, on April 19th, 2024, it ended up with a 19.8% decline. And yesterday was a 20% decline since January 6th. Now, in April, it went up like another, 60 or 70%. Now, could this be the end of an individual stock and its run? I thought what we would do is do what DeepSeek has done, which is leverage somebody else. And I'm going to play the first few minutes of a 20VC podcast because it actually explains what's happened, I think, better than a lot of the other crap that's on LinkedIn.
Okay, so everyone's seen the news about DeepSeek today. I want to just start off by saying, is it as big a deal as everyone is making of it?
Yes, it's Sputnik. It is Sputnik 2.0. And even more so, you know that story about how NASA spent $1 million designing a pen that could write in space and the Russians brought a pencil? That just happened again. So it's a huge deal. Yeah.
I just want to pause there for a bit, because like that really goes to a theme that we constantly talk about always, which is resourcefulness tends to win over resources, especially when you've had too many resources for too long a time. And founders that raise lots of money early end up spending lots of money creating pens that can write in space instead of just taking a fucking pencil.
Yeah, spot on. It's such a good analogy.
All right, we'll keep playing.
Okay. Why is it such a huge deal? Let's unpack that.
So up until recently, the Chinese models have been behind sort of Western models. And I say Western, including like Mistral as well and some other companies. And it was largely focused on how much compute you could get. Most don't realize this. Most companies have access to roughly the same amount of data. They buy them from the same data providers, and then they just churn through that data with a GPU, and they produce a model, and then they deploy it. And they'll have some of their own data, and that'll make them subtly better at one thing or another, but they're largely all the same. And the more GPUs, the better the model, because you can train on more tokens. It's the scaling law. This model was supposedly trained on a smaller number of GPUs and a much, much tighter budget. I think the way that it's been put is less than the salary of many of the executives at Meta. And that's not true. It's actually, there's an element of marketing involved in the DeepSeek release.
What do you mean? Unpack that.
Well, it is true that they trained the model on approximately $6 million worth of GPUs, right? They claim 2,000 GPUs for, I think it was 60 days, which, by the way, also don't forget, was about the same amount of GPU time, 4,000 GPUs for 30 days, as the original, I believe, Llama 70. Now, more recently, Meta has been training on more GPUs, but Meta hasn't been using as much good data as DeepSeek, because DeepSeek was doing reinforcement learning using OpenAI.
Is this distillation, just so I understand?
Effectively,
okay.
Yeah.
And so can you just help me and help the audience understand what is distillation in this regard, and how have DeepSeek been using distillation to get better quality output through OpenAI data?
So it's a little bit like speaking to someone who's smarter and getting tutored by someone who's smarter. You actually do better than if you're speaking to someone who's not as knowledgeable about the area or giving you wrong answers. And there's this, first of all, before we get into any of this, I need to start with the scaling laws. These are like the physics of LLMs. And there's a particular curve, and the more tokens, which are sort of the syllables of an LLM, they don't match up exactly with human syllables, but kind of, right? So the more tokens that you train on, the better the model gets. But there's sort of these asymptotic returns where it starts trailing off. The thing about the scaling law that everyone forgets, and that's why everyone was talking about how it's like the end of the scaling law, we're out of data on the internet, there's nothing left. What most people don't realize is that assumes that the data quality is uniform. If the data quality is better, then you can actually get away with training on fewer tokens. The better your model is, when it outputs something, the better the result, the better the data. So what you do is you train a model, you use it to generate data, and then you train a model and you use it to generate data, and you keep getting better and better and better. So you can sort of beat the scaling law problem. One quick hack to get past all of that in the stepping up is, if there's a really good model already right here, just have it generate the data, and you go whoop right up to where it is. And that's what they did. So it is true that they spent about 6 million or whatever it was on the training. They spent a lot more distilling or scraping the OpenAI model.
So they scrape the OpenAI model, they get this higher quality data from that and from refining it, and then they get greater, higher quality output, correct?
Correct. And all of that said, they did a lot of really innovative things. So that's what makes it so complicated, because on the one hand, they kind of just scraped the OpenAI model. On the other hand, they came up with some unique reinforcement learning techniques that are so simple.
What did they do that was so impressive? Because I think a lot of people want to just say, bluntly, the Chinese copy and duplicate as they always have done.
No, No. They came up with innovative stuff. But actually, the best way to describe it, have you ever taken a test before and you got an answer right and your professor marked it wrong?
Yeah.
And then you go back to the professor and you have to argue with them and everything, and it's a pain, right? Well, if there is only one answer and it's a very simple answer, and you say, write that answer in this box, then there is no arguing. You either get it right or not, right? So what they did was, rather than having human beings check the output and say yes or no or whatever, what they did was they said, here's the box. There's literally some code to say, here's a box. Output the answer here, and then check it. And if it's correct, then we have the answer. If not, we don't. No need to involve a human. Completely automated.
What about, I read about reward modeling today, and they innovated on this in such a unique way. Did they? Did they not? Can you explain that for me?
That area I'm not as familiar with, so I'm probably not going to, but maybe you've been doing the research. Why don't you tell me what you saw and I could tell you if it tracks.
Essentially, they combine two different types of reward models to get higher, more accurate output. And that was what I kind of didn't understand.
This is not an area where I've dug too deeply into it.
Can I ask you that? Can OpenAI not just do distillation on DeepSeek's model then?
They don't need to, because they're actually better still. They're a little bit better. So they could, but why would they?
Do we buy the GPU usage, or is that questionable out there?
I don't think you have to disbelieve it because of the quality delta. However, I will say this. Why would they try and smuggle in GPUs when all they'd have to do is log into any cloud provider and rent GPUs? This is the biggest gaping hole in the whole way that export control is done. You can literally log in, you can swipe credit card, whatever, and just pay and get GPUs to use.
So export laws are unnecessary then? Or inefficient?
No. They're good, but the problem is there's it's like the Monadnock line. You just go around it. So you need to seal it up a little more. There's a little bit of room left to go here.
That last bit, I love the way that government says we're going to control and stop competitors getting stuff, and it's nah. And he goes on later on, and I'll put the link to that episode. That's not a replacement for listening to the whole episode, but he's they even get around IPs. They go and do whatever else. So why? It hadn't even occurred to me that this ban on China from importing GPUs doesn't really matter, because they can just access them via the web anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, that I must admit, I now better understand, hence why I've done effectively the same thing. We've done what DeepSeek did to OpenAI by just going and getting the best answer out of 20 VC. And I think this just demonstrates that the models are just going to commoditize to bugger all.
It demonstrates how quick these things move. This came out of nowhere. By Monday, DeepSeek's app was the most popular free app in the world. And I was reading this morning that both Italy and Ireland are starting to block the app in different app stores because of concerns over the data going back towards the Chinese government. So this is a really fast-moving space. And one of the things on my mind is for founders who are operating blue ocean markets, so a first-of-kind purchase, that think they have this first mover advantage. The challenge with that is often first mover has to do the most amount of education of the market, spend the most amount of money getting customers to be aware of sometimes the problem, but definitely of the solution. And then another competitor can come in, having learnt from those experiences of those that forged ahead, come in at a better ROI or a cheaper cost or whatever value add, higher performance, and quickly capture your lunch and capture that market that you were chasing. And so we love blue ocean opportunities. We love first-of-kind purchases for enterprise in particular, but there needs to be something more durable than just first mover, because otherwise, exactly like this, someone else can come along at a fraction of the cost, learn from you, and potentially do it better, although in this case they're saying the quality's not there yet.
Have you used it?
Not yet. Straight after the potty, I'm on it.
I am cautious on the data side. I spent a lot of time reading all the GPT terms, conditions, how to turn things off. What does that actually mean? I don't know.
But proprietary.
Yeah,
totally.
If we remember when GPT first got released and people weren't aware how to turn off training and all of that, there was massive IP leakage.
Yeah.
And until we have time to like go and look at what those settings are, how you can ensure that. Is there an enterprise? Is there different solutions to protect IP? I'd be making sure that it's the most safest queries ever. I wouldn't be putting anything.
Yeah. So there was a post by Ron Shamgar, which he's the head of equities at Temin. He said, so basically the Chinese government builds its own version of ChatGPT, launches it via a tech company claiming it costs $6 million. The entire US tech industry panics, downloads it to see if it's true. China now owns every single data query generated by Americans. Brilliant.
Yeah. My time in intelligence taught me one thing, and that is pretty much I assume all of my information is accessible in the hands of all governments everywhere. But it's a genius play. Like the intelligence community even back then used to talk about building apps for some sort of very benign purpose, but purely to capture information and enable settings in phones and all sorts of things. So
in that 20VC podcast, that guy goes on to say why they are actually still providing to DeepSeek, and it's because they provide a service of data storage. So you can use DeepSeek's model, but the data doesn't go to DeepSeek. And so they came under fire for supporting a Chinese entity, but they're saying, well, no, if we're not there, then Americans can't actually store their data.
That's super interesting. And the other thing out of that I think founders need to make sure they actually heard and took on board is the fact of how clean is your data? What fields are you collecting? And think about that stuff from day one, because tech debt is real. And particularly in a world where AI is moving so quickly, if founders and their team aren't thinking about how they're collecting data, making sure they're spending time on that from day one, it's going to be so hard for them to be able to pick up and utilize these tools as rapidly as if they had spent time thinking about the data that they're capturing early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was another post that I thought was interesting by Greg Eisenberg. He says, DeepSeek just proved the worthless GPT wrapper startups are actually the ones with real moats. A week ago, nothing was more low status than being a GPT wrapper. But I think we're learning that's dead wrong. Turns out they were just early to the only game that matters. While DeepSeek, Meta, Anthropic, and Microsoft battle over benchmark scores, these wrapper companies have been quietly building the only moat that matters, interface loyalty. Because of how big owning the LLM is for national defense and the economy, the next breakthrough model is always only 2 weeks away. DeepSeek launches today, someone else drops a better one tomorrow. But getting millions of people to make your product part of their daily workflow, that's the real barrier to entry. ChatGPT didn't win because it had the best model. It won because it was dead simple to use. And I think it has staying power because of that. That's why all those AI startups we dismissed are actually positioned to win. They're not competing on model performance. They're competing on being the default ways humans interact with AI. And I think that's certainly something we've gotten our head around in the last 12 months, is that where you're going to want to get to as an AI company. That is, if OpenAI go down, you just cut over to Anthropic or you cut over to whoever, right? That whole back end piece is going to be commoditized and ultimately, I think, open source. The real business still comes to, in that same episode, talks about Hamilton Helmer's 7 powers. If you can build one or more of Hamilton Helmer's 7 powers and be able to create a sticky reason why your customers come to you, that's going to be the moat.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think just the nuances that are important, like the interface loyalty, like for a founder just to anchor on that one comment and go, well, we'll be the interface. It's a little bit deeper than that. Like how will you keep the customer? So who owns the customer is one question, but the commentary in that post is around integration into workflows, which leans into switching costs, which is one of Helmer's 7 powers. So making sure for founders, we do highly recommend Helmer's 7 powers as a great book to read and understand. Like, how do you create that stickiness, which will give you that durable competitive advantage and should lead to pricing power, while the back end of all of this becomes commoditized with whatever's next after DeepSeek.
Yeah. And it comes down to this common theme that we're always talking about is the world just continues to move fast, and it's not the strongest that survives. It's the one that's the most adaptable to change. Now, I think a lot of listeners, some part of their business is going to be to do with SEO. And I saw this article pop up and it says HubSpot's SEO collapse. What went wrong and why? And I'll just share the chart. Like, HubSpot is a beast of a company with resources coming out of the wazoo. But if you have a look at this chart here, you can just see from each year it just grows. It peaked in January 2023 and it just continues to fall. The article says organic traffic appears to have declined sharply, dropping from 13.5 million in November to 8.6 in December, according to SEMrush. HubSpot's blogs seem to have taken the most impact. It may be Google wants to stop rewarding websites that publish content outside of their area of expertise, that lack of depth and topical authority on. The type of content that is geared towards getting Google organic traffic than being written for people, what Google might call SEO first content. Some of the topics seen huge declines for HubSpot appear to be blogs about famous quotes, writing a resignation letter, or cover letter examples. So why do we care? SEO just keeps getting harder. HubSpot for years executed a masterful content strategy that was emulated by countless other brands and websites. For years, it was considered by many to be the gold standard of B2B vendor blogs. Now it appears that the SEO playbook is no longer working, likely due to a combination of Google core updates and AI overuse. Reminder, you need to think depth, not breadth. And that got me thinking, because for a long time, some of companies I've engaged with, their SEO content was very good at getting random stuff. But a lot of the time it wasn't actually relevant to their core thing. And I can see why Google would see that as gaming the system.
Yeah, I think this is a great development. And I think we've talked about the evolution of SEO back in November, December last year as well, of just making sure that whoever is responsible looking after this sector is very much fine-tuning that to not only optimize for Google ranking, but to optimize for search results on GPT, on Claude, on whatever interface we're trying to optimize for. And I think it's an ever-changing, fast-paced environment for SEO. But I think this shift to having relevant content should be something that founders should be happy about. This means that you can spend more time talking about your niche, talking about your domain expertise, and actually adding value to your end consumer. And if you look at what's happened on the social media front, a similar thing's happened, but probably 18 months, 2 years ago, we had this shift where you went from big brands doing a lot of campaigns and being the front of their brands to it shifting to creators. And that's because at the end of the day, consumers want to hear from people like themselves of how is this product helping you? How is it working? And so this is, to me, very same in the fact that talk about what you know, add value to your consumer. And at the end of the day, write about your product and how you're going to make the end person have more value in their life. So I think this is good.
Yeah, totally. And it reminds me about Canvas. Yeah, putting metrics to your funnel where you're looking at eyeballs coming in, but going all the way through to conversion, retention, referral, and actually having that critical analysis of not just looking at eyeball numbers as raw data and saying, wow, we hit 10,000 views or whatever engagement on a post, but are they actually a target customer who are going to translate through the funnel and convert? Otherwise, it's just vanity. And I'm seeing this at the moment. There's a startup I was chatting to this week, and they'd engaged an agency to do some video content. And it was, you guys probably seen this on your feed, like there'll be some sort of viral kind of video content, and at the end there's an ad. But the problem is the disconnect between the viral content and who that speaks to from the ad hook, which is for a completely different customer archetype. And so while they're getting great eyeballs, they're not going to get the conversion. And so I think, this shift to, I think SEO has always been changing, right? But we've talked about this before. As we head into more AI-generated marketing, high relevance to the individual is going to be more important than ever. And generic content that speaks to mass audiences that aren't your target customer are pointless.
Yeah, and I think that to tag on that, Aaron, it's exciting now that you can generate content. Let's say you have 3 or 4 personas that you're targeting as a business. You can now afford to create content specifically for each of them. And you don't have to create mass marketing. And I think that's exciting. And I'm excited to see where this goes and for content that I'm receiving to actually be more valuable for me versus, okay, I might be an outlier in this brand's targeting, even though I have a loyalty to it. I'm clearly not their target market. And so I think this is an exciting evolution.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and there was a post that I'd seen that I think speaks to some of this by Kyle Poyer. He said, HubSpot's reported SEO decline is a wake-up call, but not in the way you think. One, if you don't own the audience, you're constantly subjected to the whims of the algorithm. This week it's Google, last week it was TikTok, before that it was Twitter. Maybe next week it's going to be LinkedIn. Owned first-party audiences, or even better, communities, are worth more and more. HubSpot saw this coming years ago and bought their own media assets. See the hustle. They're not alone. Paddle acquired Profitwell, Zapier acquired MarkerPad, SEMrush acquired Backlinko, and Pendo acquired Mind the Product. This could be a newsletter or a podcast or a Slack community or whatever, as long as it's yours. And then he says, 3, attracting first-party audience requires a very different skill set compared to SEO. The traffic that HubSpot lost, I suspect it was mostly generic. So I think he's dead right. And if you look at our strategy, right, with the podcast, we're trying to create the community of Tribe, running the offsites. You know, we're following. Do we do any SEO?
There's an SEO optimization plugin in our website.
Okay.
No.
Maybe we should look at that. Yeah, and it's probably does somebody copy this yellow bold here?
I copied it down.
We forgot it
Since
again.
we've forgotten it multiple episodes.
Well, we've forgotten 2 things. We've forgotten the 4th wheel. Jack's on leave today, traveling. We should probably even acknowledge he's not there in case listeners are sitting there going, fuck, Jack's quiet today. But
Shout
2,
out to Jackie boy.
Just another shout out. The more that you can subscribe to either YouTube or the podcast channels and leave a review, the better we actually move up and share our rambling. So that's a good.
Well, it's fair to say if you're still listening at this point, there's some value, whether comedic or some form of intelligence that you have seen in what we're talking about, where there's some value. So please like and subscribe. It would really help us.
Do a couple of quick ones here. One of the things that I think it can be hard for founders sometimes to understand when we're looking at investments, just because the failure rate's quite high, is every investment we're looking at we ask, can this return the fund? Can this return the whole fund? Like the game that we're in is, and so it's not like, can you build a good business? And a lot of founders can build great businesses. Can you return the fund? And if your dynamics exist, like you as a founder, your ability to build a performance culture, not tolerating crap, a good market, a big enough TAM, tailwinds, structural advantages, all of those things, the VC game is reasonably dumb. We've got these series of things and we go, can you return the fund? Which is different to, is this a good business?
100%. And it as ex-founders, how many times do we say a great business, but we just can't invest? And it's a little disheartening, this game. But as well as being a lesson for founders, this is a lesson for LPs and investors when choosing funds to invest in. Because if you're putting your money into the big funds, just by the nature of this rule, you are ruling out a whole heap of great companies that they can't invest in because the multiples just won't work. And this is why the data shows that smaller funds, and particularly emerging fund managers, outperform the larger funds. And so for LPs to understand that is actually really important.
Yeah. I think you're right, because again, angel investing at that really early stage gets into a problem where people invest in, they love the founder, but the dynamics of what they're involved in. Now, the challenge is great founders pivot. And so there are a whole lot of case studies where you back the founder who was in a small TAM, small niche, small this and whatever else, and then they found the other. That's got another layer of risk associated to it. And then finally, which is just related to, I guess, finding niches, Greg Eisenberg posted, the clearest path to a 10 mil ARR B2B AI agent startup, he says, is look for industries still running on Excel and email, not the obvious ones. He's talking about specialty insurance, equipment leasing, commodity trading, or commercial real estate. Places where middle managers are drowning in spreadsheets and six-figure mistakes happen monthly. Build a small specialized agent that each handles one part of their workflow. One agent extracts data from PDFs and others and compares to historical data. Another one flags abnormalities. Another one drafts responses. Chain them together, and you've automated the entire workflow for teams of people. He then says the distribution playbook. Flood LinkedIn, X, YouTube with 60-second videos solving real industry problems. Every video has a free magnet, a free lead magnet, like a template, a calculator, free AI agent. If you can get a 2% click-through rate on your ad, then pour spend into it. Target no more than $3 a lead. Aim for 100 leads a day. Build a lead magnet factory. New free lead magnet tools. Then the numbers, right? Organic content and lead magnets is what's going to get you from 100 to 300,000 ARR. Paid amplifications of your winners will get you from 1 million to 3 million ARR. Webinar funnel conversions, 5 to 10 mil ARR. Once your agent network is crushing it in one vertical, you'll spot other workflows. Now you've got options. Keep scaling in your lane, partner with others to launch new markets, get acquired and hang on the beach somewhere, or build one industry's pain point end-to-end playbook for automating their entire business. Look, life's not that simple, but that's a really cogent, I really liked the way he linked those through, and the word focus is in there as well.
Yeah, it makes it sound simple, and we know it's not, but I love this. Just niche industry, niche problem, focus, and execute.
But what I'm seeing with our portfolio and my broader portfolio is the founders that are doing this to themselves, right? They're actually learning enough and partnering with enough of the tools to go and create their own little AI agents, string them together. They're then creating little how-tos for their clients using short form video on LinkedIn and others. They're doing this to themselves as well.
Yeah. I had a mentoring session this week, one of those kind of round robin things with a series of founders. And it's hard when someone comes from an industry and they see this problem, but then they go out and make it the everything for all people everywhere solution. And I think to the point of this article, just go super niche. The riches are in the niches. Just go super niche, focus, get the cut through. To borrow from Ed at Octopus, you can tilt into bigger markets later. But you win by going niche.
Ash?
Look, I think it's also a great example of how to do a lot of what he said. If you actually follow, he's got, here are your 4 free resources I've put together for founders. He's done what he's told you to do. And I think that's just another example of going, here is useful content for me to generate a lead from as well. And so I think it just reinforces all the other conversations from earlier today. But yeah.
Touches on something Jack said a couple of weeks ago around AI enabling the small startups to start that are great businesses and cash flow positive, cash generating, profit making machines, but they're not necessarily going to be unicorns. And this type of tooling and this type of approach you can absolutely do that.
Well, it transitions into our Sharts section because the first Shart.
I just submitted one too via our
what?
WhatsApp.
Oh,
it's
okay.
not really a Shart, but
I was going to say we have a Shart submission service.
We probably do.
Just stand by, Ash.
It's a video. It's not really a Shart, but I think you'll get a giggle.
Is this you? Hang on.
I don't think you're looking at the right one.
I think it's linked to the wrong thing because I
got a raise today. Woohoo!
No.
I've got Trump and Musk dancing at a dinner.
That's exactly it.
No, I've got the one that I've got here is woohoo! I got a raise today. It was a raise in my medication. and
they're both brilliant.
Yeah, that is that just to me or is it? So, yeah, I think the link.
The algorithms are doing their thing.
Anyway, well, we'll move on to Don's Sharts.
Yeah, okay. Well, the first one is linked to that last one. It's a graph. Over time, you got stress on the left, time on the right. Bootstrapped, if it's going well, stress decreases over time. And then VC backed, however, your stress is always going to be the same. And I would suggest it probably actually gets worse.
I was going to say, I think the VC backed stress curve should go up and to the right.
Yeah. It's this weird nuance. It's sort of I love VC. I don't recommend it to anyone.
Oh, yesterday I did have a moment of questioning what we're doing.
After one call and then connecting with another investor, I did start the conversation with, can you just explain to me why we don't take our money, put it in S&P 500 and then caravan around with the kids? What, just explain this to me.
You can't have outsized upside without some outsized downside moments.
All right, continuing on. This next chart is the innovation gap between the US and the US and the EU is wide and growing. The number of world-class patents in digital advanced technologies. If you just look at the US, it's like 50,000. China is just going exponential. But Japan, South Korea, EU just continue to lag behind. And when we talk about culture early on, the culture of the US and the culture of what's happening in China, and when you just look at the regulations in the EU, I saw a post, I think it was like in Germany, like it's law that for like a Series A or something, a lawyer has to read you every line and you have to have a witness and you have to sign it. And like it's not uncommon for that process alone to be $20,000.
Oh my God.
So,
wait, so is this the number of patents registered in each country?
Yes, that are worldwide covering.
So domiciled US patents that have global reach.
Yes.
Because some of these countries, you have to, even if you submit a global patent, you then have to submit individual countries depending on the country, right? So
I have done no further due diligence other than copying this. But would you agree
I really struggle with the Sharts
Would you agree though it's a good chart?
Great chart.
Look, it's got different colors. It's got an x-axis. It's got a y-axis.
I always struggle with the measure of innovation being patents. But look, it's one measure of. I think for me the rise of China and this is China copped a lot of criticism for a long time for breaches of IP and all these sorts of things. But the learning curve that they went through and the investment they have made in hoovering some of the world's talent, and they had programs to attract PhD candidates from around the world to relocate there. They were paying teams multi-millions US to relocate there. I think this is a curve that's going to continue, like the trend is going to continue.
I think you'll see other countries or regions start to pop up and really start to be prevalent on the innovation front. Like, I think you'll find it really interesting listening to that talk at Davos I sent through in our group chat yesterday. I think Saudi Arabia and just that general region, I think there is mass to come from that sector.
I look forward to watching that video. This is US equities versus the credit risk premia. You can just see that little blip really didn't do anything. We're not yet in a world of a lot of volatility, and if you have a look at the way that spikes, and so for listeners at home, you have your 2001 significant spike, you've got your GFC spikes, you've got your Volmageddon from Feb 11, and there are these regular spikes, but we haven't seen them as yet. This next chart is the market cap weighting of semiconductors. And so in 1973 to 1993, it was like 0.5%. 1993 through to like the tech boom, it went from like 0.5% to 4%. Then the tech crash brought it back down to about 1%. Since 2008, it's been growing from 1% up to 2% in like 2023, but it's now gone up to like 5%. Now, what we just know is that these things tend to not be that healthy when you've got that rapid rate. So it'll be interesting to see if the likes of NVIDIA continue to maintain their dominance with the way these models are commoditizing. This was from last week. I just copied it across, but this is the defense spending as a percentage of GDP based on your distance from Moscow, which, as we know, the Russians can be a little bit aggressive. And so the closer you get to Moscow, the higher percentage of GDP you pay on defense. Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, Finland, and then that goes down to the right. They're all like 3%, 2.5%. And then Spain, Portugal's like 1 and a bit percent. Ireland spends fuck all. So yeah, just interesting. Depending on how aggressive your neighbours are, depends on how much you spend. I guess it's probably similar in residential. Depending on how aggressive your neighbours are, depends on what you spend on your screening trees. This is a picture of your biome in your stomach, of the different layers, the lumen, the mucus, the epithelium, the something or other, and it came from a presentation in the family office. We're running these 6 pillars of health little workshops as part of the Health Hub stuff, and I've gone off and started to get some things specifically mapped. Like there are just certain foods that kill me. I really like them, but we're actually doing some testing to better understand Don, his physiology, and what works and what doesn't work. And so it was really interesting.
Very interesting. Not sure what a founder can take from this, but super interesting.
Gut health has a huge impact on your productivity.
It's the second brain.
Yeah. So
thank you, Ash.
You're
a keeper. I don't know about this guy.
I will say I have done hypnosis for IBS over the past 12 months, and I'm all good.
There you go.
Unreal.
That's good.
Power of the brain, and you just do it on an app because
which bit do they hypnotize? All right, I'll leave that there. No, the more I get into different things, I'm not saying I'm full Joe Rogan, like full conspiracy, anti-pharma, but there's this middle ground of more holistic stuff that you can actually do to not need the pharma stuff. Like the pharma stuff is still important, but are there clearly some things that are more on the causality side and gut health and a whole lot of other things? I think absolutely. And that if you want to operate in a high performing manner, your brain and how you feel, a lot of it starts in the gut.
Yeah, and neuroplasticity, a lot of it starts in our thoughts. It's fascinating. My sister's retrained as a GP in this field, and it's fascinating how much chronic illness and long-term illness is actually attributed and can be controlled through thoughts, which sounds really bizarre. But when you actually map out the power of victimhood and the stories we tell ourselves and our senses of ailments, it's really fascinating. And the results that she's getting for some of her patients just through, like that Hardwiring Happiness book, like a programmatic approach to changing the way you think, has these phenomenal physical health outcomes.
Yeah, that's why I've mentioned in a previous podcast the breathworks train that I'm well and truly on, because the ability to drive a physical release of negative energy from a range of different life scenarios, to be able to have that as a tool in your toolbox is incredibly powerful and something we're trying to sort for the next offsite, because done properly, as you said, Ash, it's not some Sunday brunch. Then finally, are you easily discouraged? Here's a man who failed in business at 31, defeated for the legislature in 32, again failed in business 34, sweetheart died in 35, had a nervous breakdown at 36, defeated in an election in 38, defeated for Congress 43, defeated for Congress 46, defeated for Congress 48. Read the room. Defeated for the Senate at 55, defeated for Vice President at 56, defeated for Senate 58, elected President 60. That man was Abraham Lincoln.
So I found this a couple of weeks ago, and it was a post kind of motivating founders, like, despite all your failures, keep going, you'll eventually have success. I actually read it more as how the US elects presidents and their track records prior to getting office. But nonetheless,
can you imagine how annoying Abraham Lincoln must have been? Well, one final one. I can't remember where I found this. I just learned that if a hermit crab finds a new shell that is too big, it will wait for other hermit crabs who need new shells to gather. And then they will organize themselves by size and trade shells. And I'm pissed that crabs have a better housing market than we do.
That one's awesome.
That is so good.
What are we looking forward to?
We've got some nice weather coming in Adelaide this weekend. Some nice, hot, dry days. So beach is definitely on the cards. And looking forward to getting our Notion page for the Captive Fun close to done, I feel. It's nearing the end, I hope, but I'm sure that it will never end.
You've done an exceptional job with that, Ash. That is so
yeah,
good.
You've done bloody well, Ash. It's looking great. I am keen to get my head out of these docs, but I'm looking forward to. So Tribe is supporting alongside Mandalay Ventures with a visiting AgTech delegation that's coming up, and this afternoon jumping on just to say hi to half the cohort from one time zone globally. So that'd be nice to see who's coming over and get to know them a bit more before they land.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of portfolio stuff happening here, and yeah, just looking forward to getting into that. And then I've got to pull my socks up for Jack to get the quarterly updates, which is always a joy. And then it's coming in the mail, but just because I've been trying to find a few things, I did re-download Facebook, which is dangerous because then I get all of the ads. And there's this necklace AI thing that just like records, it just sits there recording everything, and then like sends you what it believes the action items were. It sends you the different bits and pieces. It will then integrate with all sorts of different bits and pieces. So anyway,
why do you need a necklace when your phone can do that?
Because when I'm on the phone, I don't like to have my phone around with me, and I want to like annoy my wife a little bit as well, because she is going to hit the roof when she sees it.
I think I like the ubiquitous aspect.
Like it's just, I just want to test it. Like it's just.
I like it.
How much was it, and how ugly is it?
Like $95 plus $40 shipping, so $140, and it
US
just lives
or Australian?
US. So
I'm keen to see how it goes. I thought you were going down the path of this is like a virtual psychologist that's just going to listen to everything you're saying and
no, it would blow up. No, it just blows up. It catches on fire and goes, no, I'm out. So yeah,
we get next week on the podcast. Like,
well,
is
I'm
that
hoping.
something you're looking forward to?
I paid for Express.
Oh, I'm keen to see how it goes.
So some of these note takers, like that we use in Zoom and stuff, are actually getting really clever at finding the tasks, at summarizing some of the things.
That's why I don't know why you're adding something in.
Yeah, but it's another thing that you've got to add if it's always there. And with the portfolio support, like part of the challenge is some of it's structured, i.e. the one that you're welcome to join. There's like a structured thing, it's online, there's a note taker, fine. But then some of it, like a lot of it's phone calls, like random stuff that's coming in. And if my brain has to remember to turn something on,
hit record,
and then go and find it and then put it into something, that ain't going to happen.
No, I agree.
So do you know what I think is going to be awesome though? Libby's going to be able to have a recording of all your action items for home.
And that's the other bit that I'm really excited about. Our au pair / administrator has started, and sitting with one of the things I learned is that you don't really understand something unless you try and train someone. So I've been training her on Notion, but my Notion skills have just gone up a lot because I had to actually explain to someone else what I wanted.
I look forward to seeing this Notion.
We'll compare notes. Not as good as yours. I'm going to learn from yours. Yours was exceptional.
I mean, I want one for life admin. I'm just too lazy, so I'm hoping I can just duplicate yours.
Yeah, well, what we've done. So, like, so the problem is when you've got, let's take the property. You've got the machinery. That shit's got to be serviced. It's got to be insured. There's regular bits and pieces, and then the problem is something blows up because I wasn't proactive, or a bill doesn't get paid, which now is a late fee. Whereas having a Notion page, or if I'm trying to go back to who is that person that I used to fix the hydraulic pump out of Goombra? Well, actually, it should be there. And with some of this AI stuff, I'm hoping it just imports it. But anyway, work in progress.
Cool. I'm here for it.
Watch this space. All right, team.
I got
to prep.
Cool.
Thanks, team.
Thanks.
See you on the other side.
Bye.
See yous.